Right. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Reconcile, this podcast about transformation, consciousness, psychology, revelation, epiphany, change, who or what transforms. There's more to be said on that, but just to plant a few seeds. I'm your host, John Dixon, here with my friend, my brother here, Louis Retief, and we're here today to we're gonna flow. We're gonna also celebrate. We're gonna have a discourse and dialogue on those aforementioned topics, as well as some excitement around a book that Louis is in process of writing. And I'm just gonna open up the space here for Louis to say a little bit more about himself, to introduce himself, and then we're just gonna get rolling. We're gonna dive right in. We're gonna ask questions. We're gonna be spontaneous. It's gonna be somewhat improvisational with some structure, but yeah, here we go. Louis, take it away.
John, thanks for having me here today. I, I think this podcast is going to be about being in process. And really, I want to honor both of our processes that we've gone through since we met. I think it's interesting that John and I just met over a month ago, and we immediately had a connection at a ceremony we were both at. And I just knew from the moment I met you that you were going to be important to my integration, and I didn't even know what I was going to be integrating yet at that time. And
Mhm.
so it's interesting to see that we're now here recording the process we've both gone through. Little introduction about myself. Um, my name is Louis Retief. I am a entrepreneur. I primarily work in technology. My partner is Devin Christie, and she is deep um, in the realm of trauma therapy, psychology, transformation, and spirituality, and all of those good things. And I've been had a really enlightened path over the last couple of years, and more specifically, recently, as you mentioned, I've channeled a book, and the purpose of the book, if I were to explain it, which I think is large part of the purpose of this podcast as well, is I'm only 28 years old right now, but early on when I was 21, 22, I was reading a bunch of self-help books, and all these books talked about different principles, and it almost felt like a lot of the writers and authors were like, it's like they figured it out and they were now writing about the thing that they figured out. And I would say this for me is different. It's more about how to write and communicate about the thing you're in process about, and to actually capture it in that moment of process, because I think it's a lot more real and authentic in that way. And so I'm honoring the book in that sense. And also this podcast is like, I'm in the middle of trying to understand all of these things, and I know you are as well, and wanted to document it mainly for our own purposes. And if others can benefit from that, awesome.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you mentioned just that last piece around I wanted to document it. I
Mhm.
was gonna actually ask you, it came to mind spontaneously, but what inspired or motivated or has moved you to write and record it in spoken written word?
It's a great question. And I struggle with this one, John, because I think, unfortunately, the human language has severe limitations in its ability to communicate the expansiveness of our consciousness.
Mhm.
I actually think you're really good at it, by the way, better than I am at times, just the times we have talked about things. But it's still worth the effort to document it. And I actually, when I closed my eyes, I actually imagined when I'm 70 years old or 80 years old to open up this artifact of the process or the thinking that I was going through at that point in my life, and the words I could put to it, and maybe how that's changed or evolved, because and what other language or words or non-verbal experiences I am using at that point in my life to explain my life experience and the my being on this in this human experience. And so yeah, it felt less about writing, but more like channeling. That is was what it felt like.
Mm-hmm. Neat. With the experience of channeling, um, it gives me the impression that something, some phenomenon, some wisdom, some intelligence was flowing through you.
Mhm.
And one way that you've chosen to, or maybe you didn't have the choice, well, I know we might talk about this, but for lack of a better description with the English language for now, you've chosen to channel it in the form of writing it into this book, this pocket book. Um, but is that how it is for you? There was sort of a channeling of an intelligence, some wisdom. It felt valuable to you and to move you to this.
I think the older I get, and maybe you could argue wiser I get, it's I try to focus less on doing and more what I try to call channeling, because I think there's a greater wisdom to it where the experience, at least in my body, feels like I'm harnessing the my instinctual awareness, my instinctual power as a as an animal, and then I'm also being able to channel some greater energetic essence of creation that exists, I think, everywhere and in every human. And as a, I like to think about the concept of being a creator in creation and
Mm,
partaking in that act of creation as much as possible. And it's less about and like forceful action. It's more like channeling an energy that already exists, and it feels a lot more flowy, as the word that you used earlier,
mm,
than like rational or anything like that.
mhm. Yeah, I suspect that that dance between sort of flow and action that takes a bit of structure, some form and flow coming together, masculine, feminine. I know what we might get into some of this perhaps, but there's a marriage that's happening. Something that I wanted to share as a question I've asked myself as an inquiry related to this theme, it seems like, is am I a resistor or am I a conduit?
Ooh. It's interesting that you mentioned resistor and conduit, because I think this, if I were to explain it as best as I can using the English language, I think
Mhm,
about what is the essence of creation? Um, in my opinion, there's a polarity that exists there.
mhm,
Now, you can call that polarity or that exists positives and negatives. You can call it the masculine or the feminine. You can call it the resistor or the conduit, right?
mhm,
And me working in technology, you can think of it the exact same way as in zeros and ones. Like binary code is
mhm,
also there's a there's a directional vector that exists, and then a space is like how I like to think about it. And being able to understand how to harness that directional force, that is what I like to call it, and into a space is like how to harness that essence of creation. And there's many different ways and forms you see that take, right? From code bases and in technology as zeros and ones and computer
mhm,
systems to actually, I think, even the dance of polarity of a relationship, romantic relationship, where there's masculine and feminine energy that exists to create more humans as well.
mhm, mhm. Yeah. I'm inspired in this moment to invite us, the audience, into your book, into your mind a little bit, and to introduce us to that.
So the book title, as of right now, is called The Art of Being. I'm planning to structure it as a practical pocketbook on mastering the craft of you. And I'm actually going to use a metaphor, John, that we were talking about right before we hopped on this podcast. Is like, you mentioned that you used to do bodybuilding and you spent a lot of time, attention, and energy on crafting the outside of your body. But I think there's this concept that you shared, which I think is the most brilliant metaphor I've heard yet, is like the idea of inner bodybuilding. How are you understanding your operating system, building it, crafting it, and actually mastering all of the bugs that might exist in it, or all of the good things, and leveraging that? And so the book is about that core concept. And the book has 7 truths, as I like to call them, in it, that ideally will act as a friend or a roadmap to the listener to find ways to master the craft of themselves. And the book is written from a perspective of these are my truths and what the process I've gone through over many years to master the craft of Louis. And I'll read you the 7 truths, and we can dive through different pieces of them over the course of, or might orientate towards them as we talk more. But the first truth is what I'm calling honor your sacred journey. And the basic piece there is that, like, I'm going to have my journey. The words, even in this book, have meaning to me because my experience gave those words meaning. And they might have no meaning to you. But the whole point is that we each need to honor our own sacred journey. And so I love doing this podcast with you, is that this is as much about honoring your journey as mine.
Hmm.
The second truth is trust in divine love and love yourself. And it's foundational that love exists. And I think I really want to encourage everyone, and where I've had to spend a lot of my time and energy personally, is like loving myself, because once you love yourself, it's the harder thing to do. It's easier to love others. And so it'll help you really understand how to orientate from there.
Mm-hmm.
The third truth is embody the essence of creation within you. It's a topic we were just talking about a couple of minutes ago there, around how do you harness the polarity that exists. The fourth truth is listen to the depths of your instinctual awareness. I think humans sometimes forget that we're also animals and we have such instinctual understanding in our bodies that we can learn from, and a deep wisdom that we don't give enough credit to. The fifth truth is begin again for eternity with no judgment. The basic principle of this chapter, I'm a believer that we're going to come back in the next life, and the one after that, and the one after that. And in order to master the craft of you, it's sacred and it's worth getting right. And so there's no need to rush it, because it's going to be your life's work after all. This idea of patience and like not having judgment towards yourself or others is an important piece. And the sixth truth is what I call the mastering the art of choice. It's essentially acknowledging that life is very paradoxical, and mastering the art of choice is knowing that paradox exists and then figuring out what to do about that. And the last chapter, which I would say is my favorite chapter, is that burn this book, your journey awaits.
Hmm.
I'm not a fan of dogma. I'm not trying to preach this book as dogma. It's more written for me than anyone else. And it's about, the chapter is more importantly about everyone has the right to their own deepest subjective truth above all else. And this book is my deepest subjective truth. Do with that what you want, but you have the same right as a human as well.
Mm-hmm. Something that stands out with that last um, nudge to burn the book and start, continue the journey, continue your journey. think it was number 5. Maybe you might correct me, maybe it was number 6, but the piece around the willingness to begin again for eternity with no judgment. There's something in this idea of, letting go or burning this book, for example, um, that stirs for me anyways, this uh well, actually a lot actually stirring right now in it spontaneously, but to begin again. When do we begin again? When is the new beginning? Is it in this moment? Are we talking like the eternity of the totality of being in this present moment is always being born fresh and anew? Uh, Maybe I'll ask you, is that kind of what you mean by that? Is that the level at which you're communicating about and from?
You nailed it pretty much. It's momentary willingness and humility to begin again. And it's like this small of a fraction of time, I guess, is what you can use, but the same concept can be applied more broadly, I guess. But if you just pause long enough in silence and patience, you're like, I can begin again, right? Like, and it's always being born. If you just leave the space for it. I don't know if you've experienced that
Mhm.
that it's almost hard to put words to that feeling, but it
Yes.
exists, and I'm trying to describe it, you know?
Yeah, I think you're doing great. I think this is a co-inquiry as we like lean into this particular
Yeah.
chapter or two together. Um, but you've used the language space and this feeling of maybe spaciousness. But I am curious here, the piece around the willingness to begin again for eternity stirs for me as well a sense of the piece regarding choice and the role that our own choice, or maybe I'll substitute or lend another word for now, our volition,
Hmm.
our willful volition to uh, even just turn towards or look in a new way at this sense of or experience of beginning again. Um, there's something there that's coming up for me as we talk about it.
What what it feels like to me, John, when I'm in that moment of making the choice to begin again, there's like this acknowledgement of I've been wrong or right more times than I want. I feel this intense heaviness or weight from the past. And I'm also carrying the responsibility of the choice I might need to make in that moment. And it's like it almost feels constricting and numbing actually, because there's so much judgment I can place on the choices I've made, on what I've done in the past, or like the judgments of the responsibilities I now need to carry forward and this choice I need to own. Like it's bloody difficult to be human is like maybe what it comes down to. But like I feel all that every moment I have the opportunity to begin again. I have to carry all of that every single time.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I've just kind of landed on the on the truth that I need to just have humility and trust that it's going to be okay, and orientate from love. Or
Mhm.
that's just, you know, dealing with the rest of it is just too painful otherwise.
Mhm. 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 really like stirs a contemplative mood in me as we
Mhm.
talk about this and hearing you share about your book and the seven tenets or the cardinal directions, the orienting principles of your book. Um,
I guess, John, like maybe a
yeah,
question I'll ask you is like,
yeah.
I believe at least you, like me, acknowledge the experience of being in this human body is quite difficult. Like, do you see and honor the grit and humility it takes to be on this journey? Like,
Mm,
obviously, spend that time with yourself and like honor yourself for that.
mhm, mhm.
Another brother in process.
Yeah, I appreciate you inviting me in that way. Well, when you say grit, it actually makes me think of, the symbolic image of the grit that makes the pearl. The
Mm,
little sea clamshell and a piece of sand irritates it in that I don't know
mm,
what they are, oysters or clams or yeah. But the sand irritates it to the point where it develops a protective coating around it that literally becomes a pearl, the grit that makes the pearl. Or thinking as well here for a moment, like borrowing from images and others, Ram Dass and his book Grist for the Mill, the grittiness of our human experience that, yeah, provides so much potential. You can say potential, but for me, you asked me personally,
mhm,
provides at times, like, as you say, really damn hard. Um, And maybe I'll just offer one other thing that teaching a saying from Ram Dass that I've heard as well before. For anyone listening who hasn't heard of Ram Dass is he's no longer with us, but through the 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe 90s, contemporary spiritual teacher who is American born, went to India, um, talked a lot about awakening and so forth. And anyways, this teaching from him that the suffering we experience in these human forms, our human experiences, whatever that is, the pain, but also the suffering, is the sandpaper that awakens us to
mm,
our true nature. So I'm using these kind of three sort of metaphors, borrowing from them to help me share with you in the ways that I um,
mm,
both forget this and then at times remember. And in whatever ways I remember through my own personal practices to the
mm,
continued deepening embodiment of these realizations,
mhm,
um, to learning about self-acceptance and acceptance of life, as opposed to maybe what creates more suffering is refusing or non-acceptance of maybe what's happening, pushing pain away, pushing things that aren't um, what my ego wants out of this situation. And perhaps a bridge here to what you're speaking to, in a way, this willingness to begin again for eternity without judgment. I even I even feel in my body that saying that out loud does something to my somatic experience, the atmosphere inside and outside of me. That kind of it's a softening into an accepting quality, a friendly atmosphere. In Sanskrit, it makes me think of Maitri, unconditional friendliness,
mhm,
a welcoming, a hospitality for what is the beauty, uh, the struggle, the strife, the grit. Um, and I wonder, it's just like inquiring with you, but it is something about those moments of pausing, giving space for letting ourselves be touched by whatever it is, like maybe the pain or the love. Uh, yeah. Maybe I'm just starting to lose my train of thought a little bit, diving
Oh,
into a different dimension of being, but
it's really good, John, because I'll pick up where you left off because I think
mhm,
hospitality for what is brilliant. So, like, in these moments of like beginning again, there's now a vulnerability to it, right?
mhm,
And and it, especially the longer you sit in that silence, there's more vulnerability. And so then I find myself, I'm now in this moment where I'm beginning again. Now what? Like, what do I hold on to? Like, what is true is is what comes up for me at least. And it's connected to the second truth that I mentioned is like trusting in divine love and loving yourself. Because in that moment of beginning again, to me, what it feels like is that I am now in the emptiness of universal creation, or what you call the hospitality for what is.
mhm,
I, at least as a human, I'm like, that feels like emptiness and nothingness, but also
mhm,
everything at the same time. And so for me, what's been helpful in my human experience is that um, holding on to and trusting in love's existence, being all around us in loved ones, in Mother Earth, and knowing that that love permeates through every fiber of our being, of existence, offers you a framework to start building upon in that moment of beginning again.
mhm,
Um, and I love that you word to use hospitality because baked in the word hospitality, in my opinion, being born in a family that really loves hospitality and even a culture in that sense, like there's love and hospitality, and so
mhm,
yeah, like those words were it really hit home for me, John. Don't know
mhm,
if that's the first time you've ever spoken those words,
mhm,
but the hospitality for what is actually such a strong orientation to that moment to begin again, actually, at least for me.
mhm, mhm. Does it have an effect on your body in this moment as you are present with that?
It feels like I got armor on my chest.
Hmm.
I'm like almost ready for like whatever's to come, right? The love armors me, provides protection, but it's like it's floating armor. It's not
Ah,
like yeah, it's floating armor on my chest is like how best I can describe it.
yeah, neat. I appreciate the metaphor.
Mm.
Um, yeah, it's unique in that this paradoxical double meaning of this armor is protective. It keeps things out there, the slings and arrows of life. It can protect from that. But the inside, it's also floating, and inside is a loving kind of well, it conjures for me like a warmth or a yeah. I've heard another few descriptions of the idea of armor is like your heart is frozen, it's armored up. You've got this idea of a stone heart, or
Mm-hmm.
um, you're not actually available for love because you're so armored. But the way I'm hearing you describe it, it's a little different. It's
Mm-hmm.
a little more of a loving image that you're describing for me, for us.
Yeah, it's almost, yeah, it's got like it's the best way I can describe it is almost dual-sided the armor.
Mhm.
Like you normally armor is protecting one way normally, but it's like this one's kind of got like maybe it maybe things can pass through it. I'm not sure.
Mhm.
Something there visually at least happening in my third eye.
Yeah, great. As we mentioned at the beginning, we're in process. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Curious, while we're on the topic of love,
Yeah.
I'll ask you this question just because I want to start asking more people it, honestly,
Mhm.
because I don't think it's something we ever really talk about. And I asked one of my longtime mentors this question, and I was surprised by his answer. And so if you're willing, John, would you say that you love yourself to the same capacity that you love others?
Mhm.
And I'm curious specifically about your answer just because I know you do a lot of work with other people.
Mhm.
And I know I can sense at least that you have such deep care for the humans that you work with and the stuff you do for them. And I'm just genuinely curious if you provide yourself with the same kindness, love, compassion that you provide others.
Yeah, great question. I really appreciate it. In fact, in the ceremony that we sat in um, together, one pretty profound insight for me, another teaching, another remembrance, and I kind of described it as this sense of you know hmm, what I noticed, and again, this is still in process, and there's ebbs and flows and through all of it. I'm actually curious to see and continue to embody it in a way that I might describe here in a moment. Let's see. So essentially, this remembering was a realization like, oh, wow, Jesus, so much empathy has been going out
Mm,
as you've reflected to me, uh, the way I am and my work in the world is a lot of outgoing empathy and care for people. The realization for me was that did a U-turn and it came straight to me, to my heart. And it was I refer to it as a realization, as an epiphany. I felt it differently in my body and my nervous system.
mm,
And it was like an aha moment. Um, and this is part of my integration, my ongoing integration is essentially, you know, how can I integrate? How can I remember that? How can I, uh, if that's a muscle, self-love, because I can also confide and admit that that feels like it's not stayed, the felt sense of that. But something integrative here is talking about it, giving it some breathing room, some life, some language, um, seems to be evoking it out of me. The reminder that, oh yeah, this I named it as empathy or self-love, turning to oneself, um, is definitely part of my work.
mm,
Yeah. And hmm, yeah, a work in progress. Um, but something is coming up, trusting emergence here. What comes up is when I'm working with people, what I notice is, um, and when I say working with people in the context of counseling, coaching, psychotherapy, yoga, even, uh, people actually engage in a lot of acts of self-love throughout their day. But sometimes it's not really reflected upon in that way or thought of, like the simple things like feeding yourself, having a shower, uh, choosing to reach out to a loved one to talk, um, asking for support, like many other examples. It's just like some simple life examples that um, maybe can be done unconsciously or like unself consciously, but when I ask them about like things they do in this realm, like self-care, uh, it kind of elevates it to an awareness like, oh, there are things that I have been doing to take care of myself. Like I do, you know, do this thing, or I do go to yoga, once a week. Like that's a really loving thing for me. But I don't, I usually like think of it in a different way, but to invite the consideration that
Even
that's
the
an act of, yeah, go ahead.
like the awareness of it, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What comes up for me is we did this workshop with a group of friends, and um, we asked a question in terms of like, how do you feel in relation to yourself? And I was surprised at how many people struggled with that. Like, like the amount of times people ask, like, what do you mean? Like, and I think few of us think about ourselves as an entity even outside of ourselves, right? You can call it your soul or, your and like it's something to like take care of, and like consciously take care of it. And so I while you were speaking there and expressing, your process through this, and I've had my own quite difficult journey through this process where I've 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 over optimized for what I call harmony, to the point of group harmony or individual harmony, and even in a relationship with someone, or even in a professional working relationship with someone, where I've I've found the tendency that I over optimize for harmony so much that it like actually hurts Louis in the process. And I had to spend quite a lot of time thinking, feeling, I'll not use the word thinking, feeling through this. And I came up with this concept of enlightened self-interest.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not egoic and like entitlement or anything like that, but it's like acknowledging that by taking care of yourself, you're going to be able to take care of many others, right? And but there's this piece of like putting yourself first or loving yourself first before you love others that I think is really important, because you'll just have even that much more to potentially give. And so enlightened self-interest is a concept that I had to spend many, many cycles on and feeling through. And even still to this day, I need to remind myself of it at times because I forget it. But that's been a good three anchoring words for me, at least.
Yeah. And when you say remind yourself, do you mean like reminding yourself that it's okay to pursue enlightened self-interest or to even have that, to even have a self and self-interest?
My what I call my harmonizer part is so strong, John, that it has the ability to actually manipulate me for group cohesion and others, being put first, that it fools me into thinking that I'm putting myself first. And so like I
Mm.
need to be I need to be I consciously knowing that part of me is so strong, and it comes from my childhood and upbringing, and happy to entertain that topic as well. Um, but like the realization on how strong that part is, and like has it taken over self, and is it orientating from harmony, or it am I actually being focusing on enlightened self-interest and orientating from self.
Yeah, wow, I really appreciate the distinction, and I wonder if I were to sort of reflect back to you in a different way, if it resonates with you. But when you say optimizing for harmony, whether it's in an intimate relationship or work or other social relations, like I was maybe just to be clear, am I understanding it in that way? It's this a social, interpersonal kind of mode of being that's, to use your words, optimizing for harmony. May I well, maybe help me and us appreciate what you mean when you say optimizing for. What do you mean optimizing?
So we spoke about this before the podcast, but I like to think about the human system or my being as an operating system. This is primarily because I'm in tech and I think spend a lot of time thinking about operating systems that, run your computer or run your business and those types of things. And once again, your being is just an operating system. And my operating system has a tendency to over optimize for harmony, similar to, if you think about just like the operating systems of some AI models, they over optimize for certain biases or whatever it is. It's the same concept, but I've done quite a bit of parts work
Mhm.
with kernel family systems, and actually thinking about these parts as, I imagine like little people sitting on like certain gears in your system and like pulling levers. I'm not sure if you've seen the movie Inside Out from Disney, but it's
Recently,
brilliant.
yeah.
Um, and it's like you have these little people inside of you, and like I have this really strong little harmonizer, and he will over optimize the system sometimes for harmony and will hurt certain other parts of the system because of that. And
Mm.
I need to be aware of my system's tendency to automatically do that. It's not a even a knob I have the choice of pulling for it. It pulls forward if I like it or not. I
Ah,
can pull it back with self-awareness and consciousness in that momentary experience.
I really appreciate that bridging this metaphor, describing how it is. The what stands out for me, two things there is the automaticity of it. You say it's sort of almost like I don't have a choice, but I can now, perhaps as an adult, be aware of how automatic this particular operating system or program
Yeah.
is operating in an automatic way. But self-awareness now can catch it, and then it allows you to have more choice over whether that program will continue running or not.
It's a good question.
Mhm.
I think I think the awareness of it is important. Many times I'm like, you know what? A harmonizer, what I call my harmonizer part, did a good job over optimizing there. But sometimes it doesn't, right?
Mm.
For the most part, it's right, the over optimizer. Like it's a good part for the most part.
Hmm. Mhm.
But there are times when it hasn't been. And being conscious of it is actually like what makes me me. It's why people love working with me. It's why I have such amazing relationships, and um, it's why I have such a strong energy to what I bring to any type of situation, is because I'm so energetically aware of how everyone is feeling and how they're doing. And I take all of that into the account, my little harmonizer part does, and like
Mhm.
adjust the system based on that.
Mhm.
But it also gets over eager at certain points in time. Um, and just I need to be very conscious of that over eagerness, because and be able to pull back if it's needed. A lot of the times it's not needed. But I think
Mhm.
it's the awareness part, circling back to what you even said around loving yourself, and is like, how aware are you of the knobs in your operating system and where their dials are, in a few levels 1 to 10,
Mhm.
and do you need to adjust them based on the experience that you're in at that point in time or not?
Yeah. I'm curious because was it the third, fourth? Maybe I misordered the numbers, but the piece from your book, Embodiment and Instinctual Awareness.
Yeah.
I'm curious how this might feed in, but I wonder though, so you kind of describe this sense of, to me, it kind of sounds like a form of empathy, this attunement to the others in your space.
Hmm.
And when you use the word harmony, over optimizing for harmony, is there resonance with this? Does it also kind of relate to like peace? Thinking of peace and harmony, maintaining peace, or um, is there a peacekeeping quality to it? Or is it slightly different when you use the word harmony? Maybe I'm curious about that language choice.
Hmm. I, my body is saying no. I think peace is different.
Okay.
It's it has a tendency to over optimize for others' feelings, and it thinking it might know what the other person's feelings should or can be,
Hmm. Hmm.
which is even egoic in itself. Parts are like that at times. I'm trying to. Hmm, is it connected to the instinctual awareness? I think yes. I think my body has an innate empathetic intelligence that exists. It's why a lot of folks like working with me professionally, because I will focus on coaching them and understanding what is holding them back, not in any professional sense. Like, I large part see my job as I'm a psychologist, coach, therapist, but just in the business world. Like, that's large part what I do.
Hmm.
And so I think there's an innate intelligence there. But the place that I guess I've learned is that harmonizer will hurt Louis as in Louis in itself, in favor of the group or even an individual at times.
Hmm.
And it's very nuanced. When
Yeah.
it happened, and I can pinpoint to a couple of times where it's like that's happened. Um, and yeah, and I don't even feel it right away, but I have seen the effects, months down the road.
Yeah. What are some of the effects on you? Is what I'm picking up on. Is there effects specifically on you? There's an impact to, maybe I'll frame it back. I think what I'm hearing you say, and you can help me if I'm missing the mark, but this, this over optimizing for harmony part that can be automatic sometimes and has profound value to it and an intelligence to it. Um, at times can also have a harmful effect on you. It has an impact on your overall system.
Yeah.
I'm actually struck by the word choice harmony. It conjures sort of a vibrational metaphor, musical metaphor of harmony and resonance versus dissonance and unharmonious or uh, qualities. Um, but it has an impact. It has somewhat of at times, it's had a less desirable or a negative impact on you.
Yeah. I think when your parts are in charge, it's very energetically draining.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
depending on how big your fuel tank is like how I like to think about it.
Mm.
Fortunately and unfortunately, I have a very large energetic fuel tank. It's almost endless, almost I will say. But I think of it when your part's in charge, you're burning a lot more gasoline a lot faster. When you're operating from self, you're you're more fuel efficient. Never really used this meta before until this conversation, but it's how I feel when harmony part is in charge. Is like it's just burning the fuel a lot faster, and at some point I'm going to run out, and I have run out at points in time, and the impact is burnout or just like
Mm.
frustration or explosion or anger, whatever it may be. Um, and so I'm curious, John, having you earlier described your process in that experience of coming back to loving others, giving them compassion, sometimes more than you give yourself. Like, I actually don't think it's a far off part from what I have, right? Like,
Mhm.
their tendencies are very similar in nature,
Mhm.
actually. And so I don't know if you have developed mechanisms or even seen the impact potentially of like knowing when that overly loving part or is in charge and it's not respecting the system as much
Mhm.
or your
Mhm.
system.
Well, yeah, somatic practices are really important for me
Mm,
of various kinds. Somatic meditations, breath work, resistance training, trail running, like physical activity to get into my body. Yoga, especially, is super helpful in bringing coherence and clarity into my system, integration into my system, which more could be said on that. The reason I'm mentioning that is I'm curious how, yeah, sort of circling back to the book, the section, the tenet on embodiment and instinctual awareness. And um, yeah, I guess to bring myself into it more, I can feel when I'm overextending myself, like too
mm,
much has been going out. The metaphor, like the cup is getting a little bit drained, the fuel is getting low. How do I fill that back up?
mm,
Um, and it requires of me, you know, good doses of it, introverted time and
mm.
space, or just time maybe with an intimate other, a close connection. But yeah, I guess that's what I was curious about is the somatic experience of and I wonder then that's because I'm trying to bring it back to your book piece on embodiment and instinctual awareness. I almost want to ask the question, um, is instinctual awareness different from, say, the example you gave of the over optimizing for harmony part? Are these two because that's automatic, right? That was some can be automatic.
Yeah.
Is that different than an instinct? Do you mean something different when you talk about embodiment and instinctual awareness in the pocketbook?
I haven't thought about it in that way,
Mhm.
but you're not wrong. Like you could say because I am aware of my instincts as Louis Retief, and my operating system's instinct is to over optimize for harmony. And being aware of that instinctual piece that exists in me is actually the goal in many ways. I think simply put, John, oh, the way I think this conversation is such strong evidence for the power of like knowing your operating system or your instincts. And I think you're right. Those words should be used interchangeably.
Mhm.
Um, but like just knowing that our bodies are really the temples of our consciousness, and like we need to treat them with respect, dignity and care, like you
Mhm.
do with, and I do as well in terms of maintaining our physical wellness, helping ground ourselves because there's so much in there. And yeah, I think I never connected those two things. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's interesting, and
Yeah.
appreciate like the co-inquiry that we're in on it together. Something something that seems to be standing out. Um, so I'm looking back here at that willingness to begin again for eternity with no judgment. What strikes me there, given the topic of, um, I wonder if there's relevance here. You brought in the notion of parts that we are constituted of multiple parts within our psyche that have different perceptions on reality and different behavioral patterning and habits of functioning in the world. And we could go down that, road a little bit more. But when I think, when I reflect on that tenet of willing to begin again for eternity, what I'm curious about is, if there's a habit or an operating system that has a history to it, because I guess I'm couching that within, you kind of described it was helpful in my family growing up. Correct me if I missed that part. But the tenet of like essentially, I feel as though it's like an invitation to consider, find the willingness to let yourself be completely brand new. Can I be brand new with these parts? Or like how does that work? How does that work? These habits, these
Yeah.
instincts that are so quick and automatic, but then there's this self,
Yeah.
a coherent self that's has some maybe distance from these parts. And so I don't know, I'm really curious about that. And
Uh, I'm as curious about it as you, John.
yeah,
So what I see, once again, this concept of beginning again.
yeah,
Okay, now we got building blocks, right?
yeah, yeah,
First
yeah.
building block is,
Hmm.
is love.
Hmm.
The second building block is, believing the essence of creation exists, believing you can create and you're part of creation. The third building block is like your instincts, your operating system.
Hmm.
Now what? And
Yeah, yeah.
so now you're in this moment to begin again. Okay, so and the way I imagined it is like, okay, I'm steeping in the warm embrace of love.
Mm.
I'm embodying the essence of creation. I'm self aware of my orientating instincts and my operating system. The only thing really left is like, what do you do with that? What choices do you make? Is like, is at least like what I experience, going through that process every single moment.
Hmm.
And and I think the interesting part, which is you mentioned, is like once you have all those building blocks, like do you even have choices, right? Or is my operating system in the universe and love just making choices for me? I don't know.
Hmm. Hmm. I mean, from if we were just to lean into like a psychotherapeutic lens, which underpinning that is, you know, for example, challenges or problems in living or neurotic behaviors, which were, uh, you know, essentially behaviors that are sort of compulsive that maybe aren't necessarily working well.
Mm,
They're posing to be somewhat obstacles in living well. Um, are rooted and based in the idea that from a psychodynamic lens were learned behaviors and sort of the environmental influences and relational influences that um, informed how to relate to the world, the interpersonal world, the world outside, and how that also informed an identity. And so I guess yeah, it's like honoring the past and honoring habitual ways of being, habitual modes of being, which served their purpose and for the
mm,
most part are intelligent responses to environments that humans are raised in. But then the point at which one becomes an adult, adolescent, or adult, or is initiated into adulthood in the various ways, psychedelic experience may be one of them, to bring that in. But
mhm.
um, the realization, oh, like if I, this might be a nice way to just like segue into some summarizing closing remarks for our time here, but like those oh shit moments where, oh, like the way I've been living, the way I've been thinking, feeling, perceiving the world and myself, it's not actually like working. There's an insight that sort of touches in on another way of being or a part of your being that's not corrupted by the past, so to speak, and um, the implicit habits of navigating the operating system, navigating through the world. There's this realization, aha moment, epiphany, like looking at all that stuff, that conditioning, habits of being, and this moment of space between. And there's this self. You've referred to the self.
Mm.
And I guess yeah, I'm just spinning off of what you've been saying, what we've been reflecting on, but where is the point at when like the choice comes in? If if we have the realization where, oh, okay, the over optimizing for harmonizing part, there might have been a time that you can help me here and help us, but maybe there was a time that was operating, but you weren't aware of it. It was
Yeah,
just running, it was running the show, it was doing the thing.
yeah.
But then through experiences, human development, consciousness expansion, like that awareness of this part.
Mm.
And I guess it makes me think of intentionality or choice or volition. Once you're aware of something or awakened to, what was that? Awakened self-interest?
Enlightened
And
self-interest.
thank you. Yeah, like I appreciate that. But it's like the metaphor is great, shining a light
Yeah.
on these things. And well, I could, do you have something to add there?
Yeah.
Hmm.
I'll maybe just explain like my experience in these moments of
Hmm.
choice, knowing what I know now.
Yes. Which I want to ask you what helped that, but yes, go for it.
Yeah. So, okay. So I know all these things about Louis, his
Yeah.
biases, his behaviors, how he approaches things. So it's interesting when I'm now in positions, and I would be lying to you if I told you I was always on top of this. I try to be, is it all starts with, you know, knowing this, what I call paradox of choice exists, right? And I think that's the thing to master is, okay, do I have choice or am I just going to act the way I've always acted? Or is there a way I can act differently potentially or create differently? So knowing that there's that paradox, then so this discovery process of like, okay, a choice needs to be made. is really what begins it. And what I find, my rational mind and my parts immediately kick in. You can see them almost immediately kick in. And they start trying to actively hunt or for what is the right choice to be made, right? They feel there's limited options. They're just like, they start tying my mind is what it feels like in knots and trying to make sense of things in relative terms in this reality that we live in. And what I've tried to be doing more recently is that instead thinking like choice is actually just an affirmation that comes into the awareness based on all of these things. And but it, I will admit, John, it is really difficult even for me to be stuck in that process of where the self parts are leading, they're actively fishing for choice, they're, you know, tying themselves in knots. Like I've actually had to like develop frameworks and I have these 5 sacred pillars and a set of values that help me in those moments of where I'm not in self and my system is overriding and optimizing in whatever way it's going to do that, because it's going to do that no matter what. I've had to develop these things to keep myself sane. But ultimately, I think there's more and more coming into my awareness that it's just like, I kind of just got to wait for that choice to come into awareness versus trying to hunt for it. I like to think about this metaphor of hunting versus fishing.
Hmm.
And I think we can all instinctually connect with the idea of hunting. We've been doing it for so long. And also with fishing, you can't hunt for fish.
Hmm.
And it's more, the approach I'm trying to take is more fishing for the choice to be made versus hunting for the choice, for the answers to be made.
Hmm.
Um, at least that's my current
Hmm.
try my thing and process that I'm trying to work on at this point in my life, at least.
The image, so fishing, like I'm imagining fishing rod line with a lure or a bait on, you send it out. Maybe you're using a bobber, maybe you're trolling, whatever you're doing, cast and retrieve, fly fishing. But there's an element of, I mean, I feel as though there's having fished a few times in my life, there's a skill to it. But there's an element of unknown and waiting, like patience. Is this how are you making a like help me appreciate maybe the distinction and how it supports you?
100% correct. I mainly do quite a bit of fly fishing personally,
Hmm.
uh, but there's you don't you're casting a lure. I think of it kind of like asking a question to yourself. You don't really know where that's going to land or where the lure is going to land, and even if there's fish there, you
Hmm.
might have cast it in the completely wrong spot, and it's like asking yourself the wrong question.
Yeah.
But you also don't always know because until you throw the lure or the question and then wait to see what happens. But there's this like patience to that waiting to see if something bites or evolves. Um, where like hunting, it's like you can see if the deer is there or not. If it's not there, move on. And like, there's there's the constant movement that I imagine with hunting
Mm.
um, that doesn't feel like it exists in the fishing metaphor that I'm describing.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Well, my mind is like so many branches off of that are happening, um, which we could go into, but let's see here. I was writing a few things down as you were sharing. Um, yeah. Well, a few things I jotted down were, a general question of what helps you come to some of these understandings or realizations. I wonder if even the fishing metaphor comes in here. It's like, yeah, is that a fair, it's a general question, but like what has supported you? What helps you come to even some of these rich, wise, original insights that you've written about and are speaking about here? What's supported and helped that for you?
I think it started with really starting to trust myself. Um, I encourage everyone to do that because everything you need to know is inside of you. And that starts with the process of loving yourself and trusting yourself. And I think spending enough time with myself. I was actually just on a call with a mentor before this, and she's like, she always tells her kids, like, be your own best friend.
Mm-hmm.
I love spending time with Louis. He's awesome. He's super fun. I love talking to him. I spend a lot of time in my brain having conversations with him. And I think we have like a really awesome friendship. And I think if I bring a lot of intentionality towards that friendship and that unity that I have with Louis as Louis. And I think that's probably been the most helpful thing. And I don't know, I can't even tell you where that started or how it started, but that's how I feel about a relationship with myself. So
That's really wonderful to hear. I wonder if there's a piece in it with, like you mentioned, a mentor.
mm,
It sounds like in some ways as well, you inhabit that kind of space in your work too, but your own mentor is sort of mirroring or reflecting to you, as you said, she says to her own kids, be your own best friend.
yeah.
I wonder about the value, the importance, the significance of others to reflect to us ways of considering this, like a teaching, you know,
Mhm.
in Sanskrit, thousands of years old. This is my tree. I mentioned earlier, my tree,
Yeah.
unconditional friendliness, be your own best friend.
Mm.
But does that stand out to you as like the importance of significant others and mentors? And it sounds, the impression I get is you're naming that has also been helpful for you.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Mhm.
There was a point in my life though, John, where once again I over optimized for mentors and I had freaking 10 of them.
Ah,
And
uh-huh.
I couldn't make my own decision. I had to go ask 10 different people for my own choice to give me their opinion. And then I would find the right answer based on 10 people's opinions, right? And then I would do that thing.
Hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
I actually had to be, once I became aware of that, I realized that there was a part of me that was going to mentors for answers to try to create a communal, harmonized answer
Hmm.
that made me feel good about
Hmm.
making that choice versus actually figuring out what's actually true for Louis.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, yes, in many ways, I've invested a lot of energy, time, and into mentors, coaches. I have amazing relationships that have, and a lot of credit to my parents and also my significant other that have helped me without a doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but there was a time period where I would say those that was not the case. It was at least I wasn't aware of it. Maybe is uh,
Mm.
the issue.
Mm-hmm. You know what? Something that strikes me in that example, though, an earlier stage of life where you were, motivated, it sounds like, to reach out
Mm.
and like ask, like, what do you think? Like, this is what I'm wondering, like, what do you think? What's your life experience? You said 10 mentors. I can hear in part, I wonder if in part of your sharing there was a time where maybe I didn't trust myself is the sense I was getting from you. Okay. But um the sense that I get from that as well, like the trust of in other people, though, the open to receiving from others some of their wisdom and life experience. Like I also I see a wisdom in that,
Yeah.
um, and that for me is coming from a place of, working with people who that's a struggle,
Mm,
like thinking that they can ask or even to reach out to 10 people, let alone one person to ask for support and like, hey, like, I could use some mentorship in this, or what do you think? What are your ideas? What have you learned? Like that to me is also really stands out as like a potent
mm.
uh, and important maybe stage of life, chapter of life kind of experience that um yeah, that's just something that stands out for me.
I would agree with that. There's a there's a vulnerability piece to that, without a
Hmm.
doubt. That
Hmm.
probably a lot of people you work with, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, struggle with that, right? Because
Hmm.
you're turning the when you hire a coach or a mentor, like you're asking them to put up a mirror
Yeah.
and to sit in that mirror and to pay them to sit in that mirror, you know, and to like enjoy that mirror, or reflect on that mirror, not always enjoy it, I think
Hmm.
is quite vulnerable,
Hmm.
for a lot of people, I would bet. It
Yeah.
was in the beginning.
Yeah. So as we were talking, I often have in mind that people are listening to this for various reasons and intentions, other people, and I could just put myself in the shoes of somebody who um, hears what we hear seemingly often in this culture around like trust yourself.
Mm,
And I could hear a voice of someone listening to this going, "Well, I'm trying. I don't trust
mm,
myself. That's my thing." And I want to kind of just lean back in a little bit more with you on this
mm,
question I asked, like what helps, what supports, what nurtures self-trust? Because this is a huge piece of the first tenet, right? Trust in divine love and love yourself.
yeah.
This piece is really standing out to me. I don't want to undermine or like gloss over something as powerful as that. So for you and your experience, what's comes to mind when I ask you that?
I'm not going to pretend that it's easy.
Mhm.
It wasn't easy for me, and I struggle to even come up with practical things that I did, if I'm being honest. Like I
Mhm.
tried everything,
Yeah.
and it'll probably be different for everyone. But I think there's this piece that I held on to, is that the journey of loving yourself is not going to be easy. It could take a lifetime, if not many, but it's a fight worth fighting for. And so the only thing I can potentially share with the folks that don't yet trust themselves or don't yet love themselves, and that sounds like a great concept, and it's like, just don't give up that fight.
Mhm.
Like, and find ways to keep fighting that fight, whatever works for you, right? Because it truly is worth it if you can get there. But you might not get there, and also accepting that as the fact. It might happen the next lifetime, but it's a fight worth fighting for, is what like keeps coming up for me, John, is that try everything possible on earth in this body experience
Mhm.
to fight that fight, and don't stop.
Mhm. Something I'm moved to share, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
a bridge as we come to closing, but the experience of surrender is coming to mind, which for me personally has happened a number of times in the context to bring it full circle in ceremony spaces and working with medicines and of various kinds, you know. endogenous and exogenous. Uh, Being brought to that place of, as you say, you try everything. The fight's worth it. Like you've tried everything, and you get brought to this place of, I've been brought, invited, sometimes strongly
That's
coerced,
accepted.
to be brought to my knees. That essentially the experience of, wow, this kind of fighting and struggling and over efforting that's causing so much suffering isn't working, actually. The old operating system and the ways of this mind, for example, this mind trying to figure everything out and keep it all together and be so arranged, being met with this inevitable force, which to me, actually, I want to call it in this moment love,
Mm,
and almost the egoic terror of surrendering to that love, because this sense of letting go of control, which bridges it seemingly to the tenet of willing to begin again for eternity with no judgment. There's this piece that's coming up here for me, um, that, yeah, I don't know, feels really lively, feels loving,
mm,
and it brings me to an edge. Like talking about it feels like my heart's elevated a bit more. It feels vulnerable to talk about this, but yeah, I don't know, something about um, the discovery that this particular, I mean, we would need more time to go deeper into it, but this like fighting, controlling kind of energy has its place. I'll say the fight has its place, but there's a paradox here, I think, emerging. It's strength that's discovered in surrendering to your true nature, your your capital S self, surrendering to life itself, the essence of creation that's living and breathing you. And that you mentioned humility a number of times in our talk here. Um, yeah, I guess that emerged in me spontaneously as an extension of the question, like, how do we trust ourselves? Well, what about in that experience where life is inviting you, like showing you've been hitting your head against the wall, trying everything, and maybe that was all grist for the mill, or the sand that was been supporting the pearl that's actually right in front of you, but you just can't see it yet, or it's inside of you, you can't see it yet. But um, yeah, I'm something's really alive here. It seems really like a bringing together of all the parts of your book for me as I'm feeling it, hitting an edge of the barriers of language here. But anything rising there for you?
two things, and it might be a good closing actually.
Yeah.
John, you have an incredible way with words. And even while preparing for this podcast with you, I actually, at the beginning, I said the human language has its limitations to express the expansiveness of our consciousness.
Mhm.
Am I actually just creating another limitation in my operating system by even saying those words
Mhm.
and creating an additional bias? And it's just, it's so unique your way to express it and to like recap that and feel all that. And it is actually making me question parts of my current system that I've written. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I wonder, I mean, because I brought it back full circle, the topic of ceremony, and
Mhm.
I'm thinking of when we sit with teachers or mentors or plant teachers, even uh, life teachings, the availability of life teachings. to the degree that we're open and available to receive them. I also want to ask you, it's like personally, has ceremony in its various forms, or what, we met there, you've participated in ceremony. What role does that play here in, well, everything we've been talking about, but your life in particular, maybe to make it a bit more personal, and particularly creativity, being an artist here and sharing or inaugurating in words some wisdom here. What role does ceremony play?
For me, I would expand the word of ceremony. It's ceremony and rites of passage.
Ah, uh-huh.
Those, I mean, and getting goosebumps just saying those words. We can do a whole another podcast on that topic,
We might have to.
which I think would actually be really interesting. I think specifically for um, cis male identifying individuals like myself,
Mhm.
there's a lot missing in today's culture around ceremony and rites of passage that I think are really important to our psyche and our development as men.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think it was a large part why I was drawn to a relationship with you. I think there's something to unpack there for sure, but they've been foundational, transformative, enlightening, but I've had to create those for myself.
Mhm.
And a conscious finding of or looking for those types of experiences. Um, my first one was actually very young with my dad. We had a rite of passage being born in South Africa where we went and hunted our first animal with our dad,
Mhm.
and that was, I still speak to that today, and I think it was a core idea of like a ritual ceremony rite of passage that was maybe created then that I've continued searching for and trying to find experiences that can create and center that type of teaching.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, very important, I would say, and unfortunately not available to all, and they should be a lot more prevalent.
Mhm. Mhm. I really agree. Thank you for sharing
Mm-hmm.
that personal example as well. I wonder if, um, because it's inspiring to me, it's a really rich topic for me personally and in my work, but if we leave the audience with, on this topic of a rite of passage, and um, perhaps people are listening to this just curious to learn. They know that maybe this podcast is about consciousness, transformation, growth, development, reconciliation, a rite of passage. It sort of signifies to me the um, this image of moving from one place in time to potentially, if temporality is part of it, but one place. I think we're existential beings, we're finite beings in these forms anyway, in these incarnations. So can be a little concrete with this. I think that's okay. Not as ethereal, but a rite of passage here before the initiation. I'm using that word too, initiation, rite of passage. Before is a being, a person going through a rite of passage, whatever that might be, in whatever context, ceremoniously or unceremoniously, just the ceremony of life, but through a rite of passage to this other side. That's what it's stirring for me.
Mm.
Um, and I wonder, yeah, I mean, you and I sat in ceremony together. I was one person, you were a person before. and identity and all the things and all our relations, having going through a rite of passage and coming out the other side. I guess I just want to ask you if, with that ceremony or that rite of passage, I guess, do you see it that way? Do you see a rite of passage as, you're who you are before the rite of passage will be different than who you are or will be after going through that initiatory ordeal?
It's a great question. And the thing I would caution against is giving all of the ownership or expectation to the rite of passage ceremony experience. And expecting something from it is also not ideal.
Mhm.
So I'd caution against putting that much weight on it.
Mhm.
But I almost look at it, I've had this image come up several times in this podcast, so now I have to share it.
Yeah.
Almost look like it's like imagine being a Pokemon, like, and you're evolving as a Pokemon, right? Now,
Mhm.
I don't know if any listeners played a lot of Pokemon, but it's like you start off as this little creature and then you evolve based on
Mhm.
challenges,
Mhm.
rituals, ceremonies, things that you do, quests that you do.
Mhm.
Ultimately, after your evolution, you're still the same core Pokemon, but you've evolved.
Mhm.
And so I think of it more like that. The coreness is still the same. It's not like you're like all of a sudden a different person, like a new person, but it's like there's an evolution that happens,
Mhm.
um, that's very selective actually in the evolutionary process of like who you are.
Mhm. Yeah, I really appreciate that metaphor, just bringing even the language and conception of evolution into the conversation. You know what it makes me think in closing, actually, the topic of integration.
Mm.
Um, it's a big buzzword in the world of particularly those in the plant medicine world or psychedelic spheres, psychedelic psychotherapy. I'm curious just to ask you, as my honored guest here, and us just sharing this space as brothers, but what does integration mean to you? What does it mean? What does it look like? Um, any thoughts or any significance that you put on it? What would you like to share on that?
I'll share a little bit, but I would turn to the expert on the call here. You shared some incredible frameworks for integration that were actually quite helpful to me,
Hmm.
when we were speaking about them. I remember you provided a couple of frameworks around thinking about mind integration, body integration, different aspects. Um, for me, simply put, the way I approach integration is like it's about making space for it, conscious space for whatever's going to come, and not don't like
Hmm.
over rationalize or think about it too
Hmm.
much.
Hmm.
Is my simple, very rudimentary approach to integration.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, I know from at least you sharing last time, you have a lot of different frameworks that you've used. And so I'd actually be curious more to learn in this, because of what I've heard you share, if there's a framework you would share with the audience,
Hmm.
that's been really helpful for you.
Yeah, I'll offer some things and uh, be perhaps a nice compliment. I think something I heard you share, though, as something important for integration for you is carving out some space for it to happen. Maybe before I give some of my thoughts on it, but just practically speaking, where like
Yeah.
the rubber hits the road, does that look like uh post, post journey, post therapy, post coaching session, post ceremonial experience, meaning that you literally like give yourself a bit of a break from re-entering the routines of your daily life that have been occurring prior to that situation? Is that kind of what you mean, practically speaking?
Yeah,
Okay.
practically speaking, like
Yeah.
I'm a big calendar guy. Like block out time,
Ah,
like
yeah.
actually like free up this space. But I
Yeah.
think there's a piece of like just mental space as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
important. That's less practical, but yeah,
Uh-huh.
like physically blocking out time, calendaring, all those things has
Okay.
been a helpful thing for me at least.
Something I noticed you doing, um, in the time that we had spent together in integration, space between, you know, ceremony was resting, nourishing yourself with food and
Yeah.
rich connection and conversation, and journaling stood out to me as well.
Yeah.
I think I noticed you have a journal practice. Not everybody does that, but that seemed like something that stood out to me. Um, did I get that right? Is that part of your integrative practices in part?
I carry a just even on this call, I carry a little book with me everywhere I go.
Ah, yeah.
Uh, I it's my to do list is on there as well. I love crossing things out, but I
Cool.
will.
Mhm.
Um, I'll, writing is a good way for sure for me to try to understand my experience as a human.
Yeah,
To try to explain it to others as well, which I think is even more difficult to do.
sure.
And
Yeah.
so, I've consciously tried to even do that, where I'm like sharing this book, even with you
Hmm.
on this podcast, was like
Hmm.
honestly quite scary. But it's to me, it's about I'm creating even more space for integration. Actually, and it's been a month since the ceremony, right?
Hmm.
Where it's all kind of started being channeled. So
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really happy to hear you speak a little bit more to how writing itself is really important for you, um, and in integration. And that you say it helps me understand my human experience and helps me communicate it with my fellow human beings too. To me, that does sound, and to me, sort of operationalizes what integration is actually. Like one way we integrate is we communicate our experience, and there's something interpersonally important and integral to being received by a community or our significant others or family members or partner. So yeah, I think you mentioned my mention of frameworks, and just one maybe the audience will appreciate, but it helps me. It's integrative for me. Is It's from Dr. Dan Siegel, who founded or really spearheaded, co-founded the movement of interpersonal neurobiology. One of my favorite books from him is called the uh, the Pocket Guide to Interpersonal Neurobiology, and that's where I heard him outline what he calls the 9 domains of integration. I'll see if I can remember them. The without them being in order, I say, let's see if I remember them. One domain of integration is memory integration. Um, Another really important one is state integration. Us human beings, we navigate all kinds of states, emotional, affective, physiological states. So state integration. Temporal integration also calls it existential integration. It's the notion that we're um, the notion of time and temporality is an important piece to integrating ourselves in this life, orienting ourselves. Um, Definitely interpersonal integration. So, how we relate to one another's, um, something that comes to mind to preface this in the middle here of this is he gives an image, the river of integration, and the banks of the river kind of contain it, but sometimes, um, I think on one edge of the river, he says it can be chaos. The other edge is like rigidity. And if we sway too far to one side of them, we can be either chaotic or rigid. And that's sort of, he uses that to reflect that what brings integration is moving from those banks and into the middle flow of integration. So just to emphasize the example when it comes to interpersonal integration would be yeah, relationships can be chaotic and fiery and stormy, or integrated, grounded, loving, present, really being seen and heard. That would bring integration into the relationships and then into a person, the person's self system. Just to give like a little bit of an example there, what we're sort of talking about. So we got 4 of them there. There's bilateral integration. It's this idea of integrating left and right side hemispheres of the brain and their various intelligences, you know, rational and creative, intuitive and logical coming together, working together. Vertical integration is this idea of sort of both or simultaneously top-down processing, but also somatic and bottom-up processing, or the honoring the somatic experience that tends to be somewhat segregated in a way in our culture anyways, in particular. Just overall identity integration is like considering all the things that make up our identity. And if those are not integrated, it poses challenges. That's what's helpful about all this is, are there domains, any of these domains that are sort of hot spots that are not really integrated? They're chaotic, they're rigid, they're painful, they're difficult. And so what supports bringing them into integration? And then there's narrative integration. That we're really linguistic beings. We're storied, multi-storied beings. And here we were talking about it just before me sharing here is how important writing is, and for you and for a lot of people. And here we are talking and using language to share meaning and values and express ourselves. And so narrative integration is an important piece to that part of our existence as human beings. And then consciousness integration is another one, which maybe I need to brush up on that, what he means by consciousness. When I think of that, I'm drawn to consider just the objects of consciousness itself in all of its myriad forms. Or in yoga, the distinction between prakriti, the stuff of the universe, material, mind, emotion, feeling, bodies, rocks, dust, sun, stars, like all the stuff of mind and consciousness as material, prakriti, and purusha being the capital S self, the pure witness, Ishwara in yoga that observes it all, and yet they come together. And so, anyways, that was a little bit of a expansion on what I was imagining he's somewhat meaning there. Consciousness integration. I think I covered them. 9 domains of integration. I might have missed one there, but yeah, so lots of like nuance there. It invites us to differentiate, as he would say, but link together different parts into integration. And to consider, like in a real way, this is where maybe in closing, but where the rubber hits the road for us is taking sincerely, like, are there areas of my life that are somewhat disintegrated? What might help me trust myself? What might support love coming into the system, which is perhaps an expression of integration? How are my relationships? Yeah, all those Any last ponderings on any of that?
I think that was a beautiful closing and nice remembering all 9 of them. They were all very
Mhm.
actually integrative for me going through. I'm like, oh, I did all 9 of those, right?
Yeah.
Subconsciously, without a doubt. But it was a really, I think, very, very good framework actually. So yeah,
Mhm.
thank you,
Mhm.
John.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I'm just struck by, because I just glanced down, I looked at well, the last part of your book is burn it and craft your,
Yeah.
continue to live the authentic life of your being. But the one just before that, master the art of choice, be patient, listen for the affirmations of choice. And I guess in closing, I'm brought to, what brought us together here, what it took for us to connect and to communicate and choose to um, to be here and to have a dialogue like this. Stands out for me. Um, it's been really affirming to spend this time with you. It affirms that choice made, to yeah, connect with you and talk about your book and just process together here, as two men on the path. And yeah, just wanted to speak to that. I really appreciate you, as a person, and your willingness to show up in life, to show up here and in all of who you are at this time, and to share so generously your book that's in process. Um, most podcasts happen with the people who've written the book and it's published and it's out there already and it's you know uh but here you are taking the risk, as I feel and see it as like, yeah, I'm in process here. I'm getting my hands are in it. I'm getting dirty with this. So I just wanted to reflect that. I appreciate, yeah, you and your presence here, and um yeah, it's a really enjoyable conversation.
Yeah. I'd say thank you for holding the space and uh, uh, leading the charge with standing up a podcast. It's not something I've done. uh, willingness to put your voice out there as well. And I think what probably brought us together is just I would guess in both of our lives, just inviting in really conscious connection into our lives and awesome people and good people, and universe brought us together to do ceremony together, integrate post ceremony together, and share our process with people so that they can
Mhm.
hopefully take something away from that. And so that's, I think, what probably brought us together. I don't
Yeah.
know if we made a choice in coming together, but
We'll meditate on that one.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I just want to close by just honoring that this is being recorded from um, in both of our places here on the lands of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam peoples, the unceded territories, and it's an honor to live and play here and love here and connect here on these lands. And yeah, just really thankful for where we live, and yeah, how supportive this place that we live in and this dear earth of ours, how it really nurtures literally everything that we do, our bodies, this breathing that's been sustaining us through this last, hour and a half, forever, 45 minutes or so. And yeah, I just want to offer a lot of thanks and gratitude for where we come from, and those who have tended to these lands before us. So thank you. Thanks so much, Louis.
Thank you, John.
Okay, take good care.